What secret was revealed when cleaning out the home of a deceased family member? First story. Elderly aunt had a hidden room with staircase to basement area no one knew about. She and her son had a methamphetamine laboratory. This was in the 1990s in Philadelphia. It blew us all away. Second story. We all knew this one uncle had a second family. We expected drama at the funeral. No one was expecting his third family to show up. Wife. 3 children. This new family knew the rest of the family by name from pictures. How we are all related, names, hobbies. That was a wildly bizarre experience. Third story. Many years ago, I went with my dad and aunt to clean out my great-uncle's apartment after he passed away. He was never married, had no children, and lived, we thought, very poorly. It was a tiny apartment with a twin bed, a table and a chair, a couple of pots and pans, a couple of pairs of pants and shirts, and that is basically it. As we stripped the bed and moved the mattress, we were shocked. He had hundreds of stacks of $10 bills, wrapped in rubber bands, under his mattress. They were all $10 bills. He lived during the Great Depression and did not trust banks, apparently, but we had no idea he had so much cash. He never spent it on anything. He just bundled it and saved it under his mattress. Some of the bills were so old and yellowed, it equaled thousands of dollars. We had no idea. Fourth story. Not mine, but something happened in my old neighborhood. Some old man died of cancer. His daughter and her boyfriend cleaned out a garage he was renting and found human body parts. The police got involved, and it was revealed that the man was a serial killer who murdered at least 5 women, though the exact number of his victims is unknown. Fifth story. I found a hidden .38 revolver in my late stepfather's bookshelf. Every bullet in the gun had the name Steve written in Sharpie. No one had ever heard of him. Sixth story. My dad passed away in 1994. I was 28 years old. While going through his safe, I found some adoption papers. While reading through them, I got excited at the prospect that I might have a brother out there somewhere. I was raised as an only child, but could not understand why my parents never told me that they had adopted a child but never told me. After rereading them, I realized that the papers were about me. After confronting my family about this, it turns out everyone, family, close friends, I mean everyone, knew I was adopted. Except me. That was a fun day. Seventh story. My grandfather had Alzheimer's disease and was eventually moved to a home for 24 hours care, but he was pretty paranoid and hid some things around the house that never resurfaced. The good-sized diamond from my grandmother's wedding ring, for one. He died in the early 2000s, and my dad inherited his house. We found checkbooks and other things hidden around the house, but the loose diamond remained hidden. My dad passed away a few years ago, and I lived in the house for a while and recently sold it. It never reappeared. I did tell the new owners about it. Eighth story. Grandfather did drawings of the faces of the people he killed in World War II. Nobody knows why, but my grandmother said he had a lot of guilt over the things he saw, so my guess is he did not want to forget them, or did not feel like he should be allowed to forget them. Ninth story. After my grandfather died, I asked my dad to quietly go through his father's bedroom while I took my grandmother out to lunch. I explained that grandfather might have racy magazines about. That would be upsetting to grandmother if she found them. So just be a good son and save your mother from that. When we got back, my dad was nearly hysterical, half laughing, half vomiting, and pulled me into the garage to debrief. Apparently my grandfather was exactly the devout Catholic that he had appeared to be. And what my poor father had found in the bedside table was a stack of cheesecake pictures of his own mother. 10th story. My mother found a beautiful silver ring in my uncle's underwear drawer. She sent us children a photo of it, asking if we knew what it was, as it was too large to be a napkin holder and too small to be a bracelet. We knew right away it was his sexual ring. 11th story. Mine was confirmation of a wild story. My grandfather served in Korea. For years there was a tall tale about how he won a house in Korea, unsure how to phrase this politely online, that it included the family who owned it and essentially anyone who worked there in a game of poker. That when he returned home, after a few years of receiving letters and small payments, my grandmother told him to give the ownership back to the family. I do not think anyone really believed him when the story was told. Over and over again, My grandmother died when I was young, so I could not ask her if it was true. When he passed away and we were cleaning out the house, we found the letters from the family and the letter from the lawyer that grandfather used to officially return ownership. My grandfather owned a pleasure house in Korea is a sentence that is hard to say. 12th story. Grandma had multiple cats in freezers. 13th story. Not really a secret, but cleaning out my gay brother's sex toy collection in front of my father was not a lot of fun. 14th story. My grandmother was secretly using medical marijuana. She asked me to help her get her card, and I took her to the dispensary when she wanted to go. The rest of the family found out when she passed away when they found some edibles in her nightstand. I miss her every day. 15th story. I helped my friend clean out her uncle's place when he died. A closet in his bedroom contained massive amounts of gay pornography films, magazines, photos, and so on, along with boxes of dildos and other toys. If he was gay, he never told anyone. He had been married to a woman and divorced, then lived alone ever since. My friend and I had to clear the space out, so all that stuff was gone before my friend's dad, the deceased man's brother, got there to help us. 16th story. I, as a joke once, made thong underwear on a merchandise website with my cat's face on them and my signature. The description just said, "So you can wear my cat on your cat." My friends found this hilarious and bought them up, of course. I received numerous Snapchats of thong photos for a while. We forgot about this for years. My best friend passed away in a motorcycle accident last year. His family called me while cleaning out his house approximately 1 month after. They were wondering why they found thongs with my signature in his closet. I never thought I would have to explain that one. Luckily, they thought it was incredible, and we all shared some good laughs. 17th story. My great-grandmother had a miscarriage that nobody except her and my great-grandfather knew about, and they had kept the remains in a box with a letter about it. My grandmother was absolutely floored when she found it. She is the oldest child and has a younger sister. The remains were of a male who would have been between them in age. 18th story. Our single 62-year-old uncle died in the mid-1970, and when our mother and her sister went to clean out his apartment, they found mass quantities of hardcore pornography. His bedroom was decorated like a young girl's Think Montgomery Ward's French provincial canopy bed suite, and the mattress had a hole bored into it approximately waist-high. My brothers had to maneuver said mattress down 3 flights of stairs, so their recollections of our Uncle Bunny have become hysterical family lore. 19th story. My brother found giant pickle jars of coins, mostly pennies, in our grandfather's garage. He turned it into cash, and it was nearly $400. He took everyone helping to clean that day to my grandfather's favorite restaurant for dinner. 20th story. I knew my father was a pilot and fought the Nazis in Africa. He would not talk about it, so the rest was a blank. Long after he was dead, I found an army mess kit where place names and dates were scratched. I was able to go through some history books and get a clear picture of where he was and what he was doing. There was so much crazy, desperate, heroic adventure in those days. 21st story. My grandmother, we discovered, had a decent-sized safety deposit box full of gold bars. She kept meticulous records of her finances and business dealings, as she was a very successful author. Yet no record of the purchase or the existence of these gold bars was in any of her records. We have no idea of how, when, or why they were acquired. I would love to know. 22nd story. My great-grandmother was one of the survivors from a religious persecution in my home country. She hid an old English Bible, a translated Bible all handwritten in my native language, a blood-stained English dictionary really old and in bad condition, cross pendants, and so on. A group of researchers paid my grandmother for the handwritten Bible. It was a pretty interesting material for researchers to study my native language around the late 80s. She did not want her children to be punished because of her actions at that time, so the majority of my family did not know about it. 23rd story. I just found out at Thanksgiving last night that my father-in-law's cousin who passed away, whose home we had to go through and figure out what to do with all her belongings, had a picture stashed in her place of her in her Hitler Youth get-up. I am not sure how that got by me at the time. 24th story. That my uncle was a pedophile who abused the children on the baseball teams he umpired for decades. He died of acquired immune deficiency syndrome. I was 14 years old and did not find out until later. My aunts and mother burned all the proof. 25th story. When we cleared out my grandfather's house after his death, we found several photos of him when he was a young man with another man. Often their arms were around one another. As we cleared out more stuff, we found letters from Tony spanning at least 4 decades. It was clear they had a sexual relationship. My grandfather was gay, in love with another man. None of us know if my grandmother, who died 6 years before him, knew about this. My grandfather and Tony fought in World War I in France together, where they probably met. The letters speak of Tony's wife and family, his work, vacations his family took, and looking for a time when he and my grandfather could spend some time together. When we showed our father the letters, he read them, and he was genuinely surprised. He said that my grandfather and grandmother were happy together and had a good marriage. He was surprised. But he did say my grandfather would go away on business for a week or so every 3 or 4 years in the summer. My guess is he and Tony must have spent that time together. I wish I could have talked to him about his secret life and how he felt about the life he either chose to live or was forced to live. Even more interesting would be talking to my grandmother to find out what she knew, what she thought about his secret life, and if she knew other women living a life like hers. 26th story. My uncle not only had a massive hoard of firearms, ammunition, materials to build explosives, and a bunker which many relatives knew about, but most were given 0 warning before walking in to help clean up the property, but he also had an extremely large, detailed, handmade miniature dollhouse collection, which nobody saw coming. It was not that salacious of a secret, but this hyper-masculine manly man who used to beat on his own sons for acting like sissies suddenly being revealed to play with dollhouses was amazing. 27th story. My mega-Catholic aunt is still alive, but she had to be moved out of a condemned trailer in the woods, especially when it finally took a toll on her health. She is a church-going, crucifix-wearing, conservative, well-to-do woman on the outside. And then her sisters, my mother included, had to clean her trailer out when she was in the hospital. It was like an X-rated Grey Gardens. They found dominatrix gear, extremely large sex toys, cuffs, whips, and adult media of all types. They also found a family of raccoons living in the cabinets, since there were multiple large holes in the floor and ceiling, leaving it open to all the elements for years. It was illuminating to her family, to say the least. 28th story. My great-grandmother. She was a makeup consultant for Mary Kay for over 50 years. She had money, a nice house, was an amazing and sweet lady. She even had what was basically a celebration event at Mary Kay for how much of a dedicated worker she was. And one of Mary Kay's grandchildren came down to personally thank her herself. That entire event was even on the news as well. Dallas News, if anyone wants to try and find it. It was pretty cool. She was a wonderful woman, loved to spoil me, and was seemingly the best great-grandmother anyone could ask for. But she sadly passed away about 2 to 3 years before I graduated high school. All I knew of her was that she was amazing and sweet, but according to my mom and the rest of my family, there was a wild side to her. According to them, once someone became 18, she was not that sweet and innocent woman. Instead, she was cracking jokes, being inappropriate, giving sexual tips, making sexual jokes, basically the life of the party, all bottled into a short 98 at the time of her death. Woman. Apparently, when my mom and other family had to clean out her house, in her office there was a closet and bookshelf full of books related to sex and fashion. In the closet were 2 boxes containing books that were almost 50 years old. One box had a sex Bible, with a bunch of information on positions for getting pregnant, positions for better female and male pleasure, and ways to spice up sex and make it more fun. There was another book in these 2 boxes that was important to note, but it was not a book, it was a journal she wrote in. A journal dating almost 45 years worth of biographical information. A lot of the information within this journal was about her sex life, how good sex felt, how much fun she had, a brief summary of her sex life before the point she started the journal, and then the rest was the almost 45-year journey she had with a man named Russ, with whom she went into extreme detail. She described the length of his member, how thick it was, the girth, how good it felt, and she went into very verbose and honestly professional writer levels of detail about how great everything was. Excluding those 2 books, there were a bunch of pictures taken of her and Ruse doing these activities. Honestly, it does not ruin how I perceive my great-grandmother at all. In fact, it makes me think of her even better. Knowing this short and sweet old lady was the most sex-crazy lady I would ever meet, and probably will ever know. I do miss her a lot, and wish I could get to know her the way everyone else had, especially because I apparently have her hair and have even inherited some of her looks, at least according to my mom. A bonus thing they also found in her house is a journal dating back from the 19th century, where apparently an ancestor of mine actually invented a prototype version of the cotton gin almost a year before Eli Whitney. But my ancestor did not know they would have to patent it to actually take credit for it. 29th story. A very wild cat in the basement. My great-uncle had not lived in the house in like a year and refused for anyone to go in it, even when he had moved in with my mom and me after an injury. In that time, we were permitted to go into his house once, which only happened after he had a second injury and guaranteed he would never live on his own again. I was like 9 years old and went with my uncles. I was out in the front yard just hanging out while they went in, and then I heard screaming with all three of them running out. The screen door snapped shut, and there a very large cat leapt at the door's window, smashing into it. It growled and darted off somewhere in the house afterward. 30th story. We knew my originally British, naturalized Canadian great-grandmother had been an enthusiastic amateur historian who had been fascinated by Britain's war with Napoleon, not for the least reason, because she was herself tangentially related to the Duke of Wellington's family, through a cousin's marriage to his son's nephew, or some connection equally obscure and tenuous. What we did not know is that, likely in preparation for a book she never wrote, as a young woman she had actually interviewed several dozen elderly English, French, and Spanish veterans about their experiences during that war, including 3 actual survivors of Waterloo, 2 English, 1 French, and an aide-de-camp to Spanish General Francisco Javier Castanos, at the time he handed the Napoleonic army its very first defeat in the field, and captured nearly 20,000 French troops at the Battle of Bailén 1808. But there it was, stored in a wooden egg crate under her iron-framed bed, among old calendars, untested recipe clippings, and copies of Family Circle magazine, a manuscript with nearly 300 pages of transcribed military memoirs, all laid out in 3 languages in which she was fluent in her elegant Spencerian hand. My parents donated her manuscript to the Imperial War Museum, where no doubt it will never have human eyes laid on it again. 31st story. That my dad hid money all over the house, not huge amounts mind you, but $60 here, $120 there. Felt like a bit of a scavenger hunt when we were cleaning out his stuff. He was always a bit of a sneakily generous guy. Always gave me and my brothers a secret handshake with money tucked in his palm when we would go back to school after a weekend at home, and so on, so would not be surprised if he had done it intentionally. Made us smile every time we found some. If I remember correctly, I think the final total was somewhere around $800. 32nd story. My grandpa died when he was 80. His wife died 21 years before him. She was only 55. He never really got over it. When we were cleaning up his stuff, we found an old simple birthday card written by my grandma for my grandpa a couple of months before she died. On the back of the card, there were 21 lines written in pencil. Each year my grandpa would write on the back of the card the date and the year of his new birthday, with a different small note beside it each year. Like, "Miss you terribly this time," or "You would have liked the weather today," all up to his last birthday. Broke my heart. The greatest love I have ever witnessed. 33rd story. Birth certificate for a half-brother I did not know anything about. Estimated time of arrival: his name is Daniel. I tear up occasionally when I hear Elton John sing Daniel. He is 14 years older than me. He was adopted by his stepfather when he was 3. My dad only saw him a couple of times. He was married to his mom, but they divorced after a few months, and she took Daniel and moved across the country. He knows he has 1 to 2 siblings, but does not want to meet us or have a relationship. The weirdest thing about it is that he's a carbon copy of my dad. Bonus surprise is I never knew my dad was married before my mom. I also found out that my mom was married before my dad too. No children apparently. Her first husband used my mom as his beard. He married her, and 3 days later moved to Hollywood with his best friend to become a star. They got divorced on their 1-year wedding anniversary. 34th story. My grandpa was a cheesecake photographer. We all knew he was a photographer but had no clue about the cheesecake. We found boxes of it, including a box of my grandmother. My favorite part of this story to tell was one box was full of 1/2-inch penises, carefully cut out, like Dick confetti. 18-year-old me thought it was funny as hell. My family, not so much. 35th story. My grandfather had a strap-on dildo hiding under his bedroom bureau drawer. My dad and I found them, looked at each other, and then burst out laughing. I also found about $3,000 in gold coins. I now have a box that is marked "Do not open if I am dead." 36th story. My mother's foul, evil second husband was even worse than we knew. We found extensive files he kept on everyone and pages of his crabbed handwritten notes about how he was superior to everyone and how stupid and worthless my mother and her children are. It may sound like I am making a fuss out of nothing, but his hatred emanates off the pages. He told people that he actually wrote the books she wrote. Provably false. He deliberately kept them poor, hoping that it would spur her to write a bestseller and he could live off the wealth. He tried to kill her at least once that we know of. And the last time I ever spoke to that evil man was when, somehow, my mother's oxygen got turned off and somehow she dialed my phone number in her sleep. I could hear the machine clicking and could not get her to answer. I called the police in their city and state and got an ambulance out there. He subsequently called me and screamed at me for calling for an ambulance for my mother. He was the meanest, most evil person I ever met in my life. Thankfully, his first wife raised their 2 children, who are superlative human beings and nothing like that miserable piece of shit. 37th story. My father-in-law wrote books about abstaining from drugs and alcohol to find God. We found a large amount of marijuana and liquor in his house. 38th story. Cleaning out my grandmother's wardrobe, I found my grandfather's false teeth. He had died about 20 years previously. Oh, and also about 8 pairs of tartan trousers. 39th story. My then-husband's beloved grandfather had some saucy photos hidden under the felt that lined the drawer in his nightstand. A woman in a bathing suit with some high heels on, a lady with a 1940s hairstyle posing in nothing but a man's suit jacket. Nothing too racy, but definitely enticing for the times. My husband and I were packing up his bedroom after he died, and my husband found them. When he did, he sat on the edge of his grandfather's bed with the photos in his lap and cried for the first time. The pin-up style photos, there were 4 of them, were all of my husband's grandmother. She had been dead for years, and the old man could have looked at whatever he wanted. He chose the woman he had seen every day for 50 years and how she was when it all got started. She was a knockout in those chaste photos. He probably would have sworn that she had not changed a bit. 40th story. My grandfather had a mason jar full of mercury in his bathroom cabinet. Nobody is really sure why. 41st story. Less heavy than most of these posts. My great-grandmother used to send $5 bills to my mom and uncle and all of us every year on our birthdays. One year, just my mom and us were getting $5 bills on our birthdays and not my uncle. They never figured out why. Fast forward several years. When my great-grandmother died, my mom and uncle flew out to South Dakota to go through her stuff and get it ready for liquidation. They found a box with detailed records documenting to whom and how much money she sent to each of us on our birthdays. Each row included our birth date, how old we were, and how much she sent each of us. Next to my uncle's name on his birthday in 1993, the last year my uncle received a $5 bill, there was a comment that read, "Never said thank you." It was sad and hilarious at the same time. 42nd story. When my grandmother died, we found a bundle of letters tied with a red ribbon with "burn if found" written on the top. Obviously we read them instead of burning them. Turns out that our close family friend and uncle figure was grandmother's boyfriend, dating back decades to when my grandfather was still alive and still married to my grandmother. My grandfather had a terminal illness that took years to kill him and was in an assisted living facility for the last years of his life, and this is apparently when the affair started. No one had a clue that this beloved family friend was actually her lover. He was almost 20 years younger than her, and they never so much as hinted that they were more than friends. Everyone was totally blindsided. We gave him the letters, and he was embarrassed that we had found out and mostly withdrew from contact. He died a few years ago and is buried in the same cemetery as my grandmother. 43rd story. This is not cleaning out their home, but when my husband died a few years ago, I found several letters he had scattered in various places around our home, written to me in advance he had terminal cancer and knew he was dying. Some were marked "Open when you cannot stop crying, open when you cannot stop crying, open when the holidays are too rough, open when you have to put one of the cats to sleep." They did not contain any secrets, but they are heartbreakingly beautiful. 44th story. My dad was in hospice at home for a couple of months before he died of lung cancer, and when I went to clean out his house, I found that he had already sorted and packed away most of his personal treasures in a couple of storage bins. It was heartbreaking all over again, thinking of him sitting there packing up his own life, knowing it was coming to an end. 45th story. Not a secret, but a near secret. My grandfather, who spoke English as a third language, was a bit of a hoarder. Lots of old shit stockpiled in his basement, but well organized. Imagine a generic episode of Hoarders, but with a prepper obsessive-compulsive disorder vibe. Everything was sanitized, stacked and nested, and grouped logically. It was like the stockroom for a store that was not yet sure what products it was selling and wanted to be ready. So we found a cylindrical container that was kind of heavy for its size, and it had the label Old Penis. It was one of those black plastic film containers. Hesitant, but curious, we removed the lid. It contained a collection of 1-cent pieces which had been minted in the first half of the 20th century. Part of me was disappointed, part of me was relieved. 46th story. My dad kept a handwritten note in his wallet containing my mom's old address, phone number, and directions to her house from when they first started dating in the 70s. He had moved it from wallet to wallet over the years. He just died this past March, and that was one of the first things we found. 47th story. A friend of ours was the executor of his uncle's will. After his uncle passed away, he was phoned by a few museums who asked what he wanted them to do with the buses. His uncle had stashed 6 buses at different museums without anyone knowing. Edit for buses for context. This is in the United Kingdom, where people have hobbies like train spotting. Some people love old Route 2 Master buses, those old, red London buses with the stairs at the back. There are museums dedicated to, you know it, buses. People volunteer at the museums and drive the buses around, and they also store their own buses at the bus museums. The buses are not inexpensive to restore and maintain, so hiding 6 or 7 buses from your spouse is, not great. 48th story. Grandfather passed at the end of the year 2021. While we were clearing his house out to be sold, we found an old guitar and some handwritten songs. To everyone's surprise, he was a musician in his youth. He often took interest in my guitar stuff when I was younger, but never mentioned this. Or perhaps he did. I was kind of a prick as a teenager. Turns out he might be where I got it from. I kept the songs. They did not have sheet music or chords attached, and since there are no recordings, I would have to figure that part out myself, but it is something of his to keep going at least. 49th story. My grandfather died at 102 years old. Born in the year 1919, he lived a pretty incredible life and saw things I cannot even imagine. When his hearing started to go, he realized nobody wanted to answer his phone calls anymore. He would spend 20 minutes shouting into the phone about your new job, and he would aha and okay his way through the whole thing, and at the end he would ask, "And what about your new job?" Everyone got so sick of him pretending he was not deaf that they just stopped answering. So what did he do? He went out and bought himself a brand new iPhone and a brand new Apple desktop computer, and he taught himself to use both, and he started texting and emailing the stuff out of everyone. We were all so proud of him and happy to be able to stay in touch in a way that was not insanely frustrating. When he passed, it fell to me, you are good with computers, to sort out his computer, and holy stuff, this man had massive amounts of hidden shoe camera upskirt videos on his computer. Not even actual pornography, just hundreds of videos from guys that would glue a tiny camera to the tip of their shoe and follow women up escalators or stand next to them in public places to get a shot of their underwear. This man was married to my grandmother for almost 60 damn years, and he delivered a eulogy at her funeral that brought the entire damn place to tears. But he was still trying to get his rocks off at 100 years old. 50th story. I am African American and my husband is white. My father faced a lot of prejudice during his lifetime, and I was terrified of telling him that the white guy I had been on a date or two with I was getting serious with. The first time I brought my now husband home, my dad was courteous but distant. Miraculously, by the second time my father literally gushed all over my husband. Even my siblings were shocked. When we got married, he was beaming. It was odd, but I was just happy my husband had won him over. My mom died in the year 2014 and my father in the year 2021. When my siblings and I went to clean out the house, in his safe along with other important documents, we found letters that my husband had written to my father 24 years before about how he felt about me, how he was serious about his relationship with me, how he was planning to go to law school. He did. He is an attorney now, how he respected that he had gone through so much in his lifetime, and eventually how he loved me and proposed. My husband never told me that he had written my father, and my father never told me that he had been corresponding with my husband. It was so emotional finding those. I still tear up when I think about it. When I got home, my husband finally showed me the letters my father had written back. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Write in the comments below the video your similar stories. And also be sure to subscribe to our channel so you do not miss new super interesting videos, and I recommend you to watch our other videos.